So, first of all, thank you for all of those watching at home for joining us on Zoom, or if you're here in the library watching from one of our study rooms. We're joined today virtually by Dr. Aaron Elkins, who has who has a special connection with intellectual freedom and the history of banned books. Dr. Elkins, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, I'll just get started with my show. Like,
Absolutely.
as we open, I did want to read this statement. I speak with you tonight of my own volition, exercising my First Amendment rights. The information and views expressed are solely my own and do not imply affiliation with or representation of the views of any other individual, organization, or entity other than myself. I speak only on my own behalf. So that's that's that bit of business taken care of. And then I have a little agenda here. I have just one slide for meeting procedures, and then we'll get into some definitions, talk about some considerations, and end with why intellectual freedom matters. And the meeting procedures, feel free to ask questions at any time, whether in the chat or in the room, although I may not be able to hear you if you ask a question in the room, but I'm sure you will be assisted to ask your question. And I want to apologize in advance. This is Mr. Baby, and he likes to bother me while I teach sometimes. So if I unexpectedly jerk or something, that is because he has given me a little light brush on the elbow because he wants attention. He may just jump up on the desk as well. We'll see what happens. But anyway, apologies in advance for any cat-related interruptions. So, excuse me. There we go. So, I thought it would be helpful to start out with a few definitions because while there's a lot of discourse about and around the banning and challenging of books, I don't know if everybody is on the same page with what things mean. So, I want to talk about soft and self-censorship. I want to talk about the challenge and difference between challenge and reconsideration, and give you kind of a quick overview of the sort of standard process that should be followed. Then give you some definitions for the various statuses that may result from a reconsideration challenge. Discuss the difference between a ban and a blanket ban, and then we will get to intellectual freedom at the very end. But actually, sorry, we will have a little intellectual freedom definition. Why it matters is at the end. So, all right. Soft and self-censorship. These are actually not mutually exclusive concepts. Um, Soft censorship can lead to self-censoring. And the soft censorship is sort of this external pressure from various groups or people that is meant to discourage access to information without them taking formal action. Threat is kind of a strong word, but this might be, patrons making remarks like, you really ought to reconsider having that kind of stuff available, or that's, it's trying to put pressure without actually doing anything. Self-censorship, though, is the internal decision to bow to that external kind of pressure. And it can show itself in a variety of ways. So you have librarians that will not select materials that they do not think will be um, unchallenged. You can see librarians putting materials in certain locations without any directive. Um, and it's these kinds of self-censorship that I think are really the most insidious because nothing's happened. So it's sort of like complying in advance. And that's not what we're here to do. We are here to serve the public the information that they need, and that's our job. So that is a little bit about soft and self-censorship. Challenge and reconsideration. The challenge is the actual formal request for removal of material or materials by a person or a group. And then the reconsideration is the actual process of formally reviewing that challenge and then making a decision about that material. So they're related, but they're different. They sometimes get used interchangeably, and that's why I wanted to clarify. As a result of a challenge, you have sort of a standard process that this is recommended by the ALA, by the National Center Against Censorship, because having specific processes in place makes this a transparent decision. And transparency is good in any kind of governance. So this may not be the exact steps explicitly laid out, but overall, this is generally what the process is when a book has received a challenge. So oftentimes, if possible, you want to invite a complainant for an informal meeting before they have filed a formal challenge. Oftentimes, people just want to be heard. They have concerns. You can let them express their concerns, and sometimes that's enough. I had a situation when I was a school librarian of a parent coming to me to express concern, and I listened to the parent's concerns and, acknowledged what she had to say, and that was that. No formal challenge was filed. The book remained on the shelves, available for everybody else to check out, and that was all there was to it. So it's getting those kinds of relationships with people that makes this process better and may negate the need for the process. So, however, if an informal meeting is not an option, for example, because someone has just immediately filed a formal complaint, then this written request is going to identify their positionality of the complainant. So, are they a parent? Are they just someone who lives in the community? Do they not live in that community at all? And that's important to think about. We'll get a little more into that later on. They also are required to provide their specific objections and then explain their familiarity with the work as a whole, because oftentimes what we see happening is people will pull this one tiny little excerpt out of an entire work, and without the greater context of that work, it may seem objectionable, but placed in context, it's sort of just overall part of the story in a fictional work, or part of the information being provided in a nonfiction work. So that's usually the thing that has to happen. And then once a formal written complaint has been filed, then you have your committee. And whether you have a standing committee or whether you form an ad hoc committee for each instance varies. But you should have a committee identified, ready to go always, because you never know when a challenge is going to spring up. So what the committee does is they evaluate the merits of the written complaint, and then they make a decision about the merit of the work, the merit of the complaint, and whether this material is actually unsuitable or not. That decision is made, and then if the complainant wants to appeal, that usually then, especially in school library situations, goes up to the school board. In your public library situations, it could play out a couple of different ways, just kind of depending on what their policy is. So that's what is the standard process usually for complaints. The statuses that can result. So once a complaint has been filed, the material in particular is kind of like pending. The National Council Against Censorship, ALA, recommend that the material remain accessible while a challenge is being considered. Because, removing it immediately is kind of shortcutting the process and kind of presupposes the outcome to an extent. However, it's not a standard thing. You have organizations that will use a pending status to just leave a book in limbo and not make a decision, and it's not accessible to anyone, but it's not getting through the process either. We don't want that to happen. Once the committee has finished its work, they will decide that they're going to either retain the work, which means that the access to that particular material is unchanged. It's still available where it was, for anyone to check out. The committee can decide to restrict access to the material, and restricted access can work in a variety of ways. So you can have it so that it is still available, but you need a parental note, for example, to check it out. It could be placed in a particular area of shelving that is away from other areas of interest, making it less likely to be picked up. But, it can also like be removed. And that is when we have a ban. And in addition to the bans, we are seeing a lot more so-called blanket bans where similar materials or materials with similar themes, subjects, and topics are being preemptively removed as well before they've even been challenged. And that's not good. Um, that's not how the process is supposed to work at all. So those are some statuses information. And then intellectual freedom, ALA will define it as, the rights of library users to read, seek information, and speak freely as guaranteed by the First Amendment. It is a core value of our profession as librarians, and it is really a fundamental right in a democratic society. Um, it is our responsibility in any publicly funded library to provide free, equitable, and confidential access to information for all of the people that we are serving. And that's in the public school library case, that's in the public library case as well. The key concepts here really are about freely accessing information and also expressing ideas, freely accessing information and freely expressing ideas. Intellectual freedom, a lot of this has been based on the First Amendment, which reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So this First Amendment really is the basis for our intellectual freedom. It is a right given to us in the Constitution. Over time, there have, of course, been challenges, and the Supreme Court has upheld intellectual freedom throughout time. The dissemination of ideas can accomplish nothing if otherwise willing addressees are not free to receive and consider them. It would be a barren marketplace of ideas that had only sellers and no buyers. And I'm gonna point out the year here of 1965. This book banning fervor is not a new phenomenon remotely. The earliest case that I was looking at today was from 1924, trying to ban the King James Bible from a public school. So this is not a new phenomenon. I have a question in the chat, so I'm going to look at that for a moment. Does it count as censorship when a library puts a book into their collection, searchable and findable, but they don't mention it as a new book? I don't know that that would meet the requirement for censorship because the material is still available. It's if it's in the catalog and able to be checked out, that's it's available. It's we I'm gonna go a little bit off a tangent here, but I promise it's relevant. Um, as librarians, we have to select the materials. It is not possible for us to contain the entirety of printed and available human knowledge. We don't have a facility large enough to do that. Firstly, and secondly, that is maybe not what the community that we're serving needs. So we engage in selection, which taken from a particular light is a sort of de facto censorship because you're choosing this material but not that one. But the reason that you're choosing this material and not that one is because this material will meet the informational or recreational needs of the community that you serve, and this material may not. So you will collect this material, but not this one, because library budgets ain't getting any bigger. So there's only so much that we can afford. And that's why librarians have master's degrees at least. They are highly trained in how to understand the populations that they work with in the community, whether it's the community at large or their school community, and they know the needs of the communities that they serve and do their best to provide materials that will meet those informational and recreational needs. So tangent's officially over. Okay. um, Intellectual freedom is also in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So this is an international thing as well. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. So it's a big deal, intellectual freedom, a very big deal. Even minors have intellectual freedom. This has been upheld in the Supreme Court. Tinker versus Des Moines, students do not shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. And then in Board of Education versus Pico, which is yet another Supreme Court case, 1982, also I'll mention that year, by the way. The right to receive ideas is a necessary predicate to the recipient's meaningful exercise of his own rights of speech, press, and political freedom. So our children do have constitutional rights. They don't have the full set of constitutional rights, of course, since they cannot vote, but they do have constitutional rights. And as librarians, it is part of our obligation to uphold the constitutional rights of our patrons. So I want to talk a little bit about the current landscape and then the sort of considerations that we have here. That's a great question. And before I go on with that, I will address this question in the chat. There has been so much controversy about books, but no one seems to be wanting to censor movies. Why do you think that is? Um, hmm. I feel like the overall impression is Hollywood has more money. And as a result, they might be better able to defend themselves. I don't know how long that will be a tenable argument, though, because there is certainly discourse about banning media of all formats. So it's yeah, I don't know. I guess if I had to guess, and it is a guess, I would say it's probably because the impression that, Hollywood is better funded. It is a much bigger target to go up against with a much lower probability of succeeding. But that's just my guess. So, um, but the considerations that I want to talk about are the current landscape, parents' rights, which is very frequently mentioned in relation to book banning, the notion of legal standing, and then get into some actual book ban stuff here. So let us look at the current landscape. This is from Pen America, and I'm sorry, I've got links to all of my sources at the bottom of the page. It's a little smaller font and not high contrast. I did a last minute color change, and I do apologize, but they will be available to you, the slides, once I am done. So um and you can see that certain states have a lot more book banning activity than other states. So that's kind of the current landscape here. And looking at the reported challenges over the last decade, um, it's kind of interesting because that didn't used to be such a big confloption. And then something happened in 2021, apparently. So, you know, I don't have a graph of this year because this year is obviously not complete yet, but I my understanding is the number is coming back down. It's not as low as it used to be, but it is coming down some more. So I think it's in the like high 3,000s maybe. But the year's not over yet. So um I do want to take a moment to talk about the fiscal effects that this is having on our schools. This is an estimated 3.2 billion with a B dollars spent on responding to challenges. And that was in the 2023-2024 school year. That's a lot of money. Quite a lot of money. The largest expense, though, has come from turnover. It's not the legal fees or the additional security, because people do be making threats at the school board meeting sometimes, and that's a choice. But people are leaving education. It's not just teachers, it's not just librarians. The superintendents are also leaving, administrators are also leaving. Um, and that that staff turnover costs a lot of money to deal with. Because you are losing this person that had the institutional memory and the knowledge, and then you're having to spend money advertising the position and holding a search, and this money is not being spent on education. The time and the resources are not being spent on education. So the amount of these challenges is seriously affecting our students' capacity for learning because districts are forced to put this money and time and attention elsewhere. So, as I've mentioned, this is not a new phenomenon, and I include this little quote from Reverend Enos Hitchcock from 1790 when I talk about intellectual freedom in my lectures. The free access which many young people have to romances, novels, and plays has poisoned the mind and corrupted the morals of many a promising youth and prevented others from improving their minds in useful knowledge. So, as I've said, this is not new. People have always had, some people have always had some kind of problem with books existing. You know, I would pick a different hobby, but that's me. So um what I can tell you though is that very frequently challenges or bans are often underreported because this is sometimes a thing that happens under the surface, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But I do want to make note here that in 2021 to 2022, 11 people who were just 6% of the population of people who filed challenges were responsible for 60%, 60% of challenges filed in the nation that year. The second little piece of information I want to give you is the median age of the books being challenged is 18 years. And the median helps to lop off those outliers that might affect the average age, but I've given also the average age, which is 22 years. And, oh, I don't have my Uno reverse card, but I have a discussion question for you in the audience. I want you to think about the 11 people who filed 60% of the complaints and the median and average age of the books. What impressions do those two pieces of information give you? Oh, and that's a great question, Donna. But is there any discussion, thought in the audience? All right. Well, we can also move along. I Donna, it seems that recently censorship is more organized. In the past, it was just one book, parentheses, Lolita comes to mind, in parentheses. Has this ever happened in the past as much as we can tell? So I would say probably the closest analog to what's happening today would be the McCarthy era. But even that was different. And it I think is a correct statement that aligns with the research that I've been doing, that this is a different phenomenon this time. And the reason that the numbers of challenges are reaching what they are is because these efforts are more organized. And we'll come to a point of discussion on this in a moment again. But I have a couple more discussion questions for y'all, so you're not going to get off easy. Okay, let me go on to talk about parents' rights And this is excerpted from an interpretation of the Library Bill of Rights from the ALA, American Library Association. We affirm the responsibility and the right of all parents and guardians to guide their own children's use of the library and its resources and services. Only parents or guardians should restrict their own children's access to library materials and services. So this conversation about parents' rights, you already have them. This has already been existing. This has already been what the policy has been the whole time. Uh, you as a parent have always had the right to direct your child's use of library resources. And it has absolutely been your right to tell the librarian, I do not want my child to check out X, Y, and Z. That's always been the case. That's always been the case. Um, so a question I have for you is parents already have the right to restrict their own children's access to library materials and the responsibility to guide their own children's use of the library and its resources. Should one parent be able to make decisions for other students and families about their access to information? Any thoughts from the crowd? Okay. Well, another question for thought. We don't necessarily have to discuss it. We can just think about it. So, um, I want to talk a little bit about the legal concept of standing. And I will preface this with I am not a lawyer. This is based on a little bit of research that I did. And I think it's pretty straightforward. So, um, in order to have standing, legal standing, meaning to bring a lawsuit, for example, the plaintiff, the person who has the complaint, has to have or will suffer an injury in fact. This must be a specific and actual harm, not just a general, I don't like this. It has to be an actual and specific harm that they can name. The second component is that the defendant is the party responsible for causing or will having caused the injury. And the third part here is very important, is that it's by this lawsuit, it will be possible for the court to provide redress. And what that means is that the plaintiff thinks that I have suffered a harm, the defendant has caused this harm to me, and the court can provide me with the redress that I need. If your complaint doesn't meet all three of these, you won't have standing, typically. So this last one I think is maybe a little complicated to understand, so I wanted to spend just an easy bit of time talking about it. The specific example from the website that I consulted was a man had filed a lawsuit against the company that he used to work for, saying that the DEI trainings that they were asking him to take were creating a hostile work environment. And he quit that job before the lawsuit got to the court. And the lawsuit got to the court, and the court said, you quit the job. There's nothing we can do for you to fix this situation. You are out of the deal. Like it's not. There's no redress possible to give you. So the lawsuit was dismissed. So that makes it a little complicated. But oh, okay. Let me see. I've had a couple things in the chat. Seems like maybe since the 80s, we as a group have wanted to control others' morality. Take smoking, for example. Okay. Um, well, I, I could make a particular argument about smoking, but um, because I don't find that to be so much of a moral issue as like I don't want cancer. And if you smoke next to me and the smoke is I'm breathing it in, that's not going to lend myself to living a cancer-free existence. It's a little bit different kind of thing, like but the let me come to the next point here. Instead of making it an individual choice, it was made illegal. So that idea has gone to where person A feels they know what is right for all children because others are not as good of parent and is not protecting their child as they should. Um, sure. I mean, people can certainly absolutely have that viewpoint, but does that entitle them to put their viewpoint on you? Like I don't legally I don't see how somebody is like I'm the best parent in the world and everybody needs to do what I say because that's also not reality based, I guess. Like it's a kids are different. Like they have different needs and what works for this child is not going to work for this child is not going to work for this child is not going to work for that child. So I, you can have non-reality based perspectives. That's allowed. It's just complicated when you try to enforce that. So okay, I've got a couple more questions in the chat. If it's about protecting children, then what is keeping regulations from the libraries? Sure, freedom of speech, but we have already been told privacy is overruled by security. Has there been a time when something similar has been in place for books? Freedom of information isn't as important as security. Um, I I think that the people who are challenging books um may, many of them may feel like they're doing what is the right thing. And they're allowed to have that feeling. Um, where it gets problematic is we all have constitutional rights and somebody can't just be like, well, I'm taking your constitutional rights because I think you're a bad parent. That's not a productive path forward. Um, let's call it that way. I don't know that it is all entirely about protecting children for everyone who files complaints. Because, I'm thinking of those 11 people in particular. This is a very coordinated um, effort in that regard. So the I the debate over privacy versus security, I mean, I'm just reminded of, kind of like post 9/11 times, you know, with the Patriot Act and then the later USA Freedom Act. Like, um, I I think there's just been in general sort of a massive erosion of people's sense of privacy um, with social media because we know the platforms are harvesting our data um, and using that to sell us ads. Um, it I think it's complicated because also with social media, people just put details of their lives out for public consumption, and that seems weird to me, but choices, and they're free to do so if they want. That's expression. Um, I I think that the erosion of the concept of privacy is maybe part of this to an extent, but I'm I don't know for sure. I'll have to think on that a little bit. But well, I yes, perhaps that maybe maybe those 11 people feel they're very dedicated and doing what they can to save children from reading. Um, so you know, I don't really know what's going on in their minds. So, okay. So withstanding then, this is a little discussion thought, we'll call it. But should someone who does not live in or contribute to the tax base for a community served by a school district or public library have legal standing to file a complaint? Like, because they've kind of been being given it by some courts. So that's a question to think about. Whether we are accurately following standing. Book bans in particular. This is the 1982 Island Trees case again. Local school boards may not remove books from school libraries simply because they dislike the ideas contained in those books. But well, we also know, PEN America, these bans are overwhelmingly happening in districts where school authorities are not following best practice guidelines to protect students' First Amendment rights, often making opaque or ad hoc decisions, in some cases in direct contravention of existing policies. So I talked about that sort of standard process that a challenge follows, and we know that this is not happening actually, even in places where that's explicitly the process. So a little discussion thought for you here. Which thing do you think represents the greater legal liability? Not following established reconsideration procedures or not removing materials? Because if you're not following your own procedures, you ought to expect a lawsuit. Like it that's not a good choice to make. But yes. So, why does intellectual freedom matter? Thomas Jefferson, wherever the people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government. If we are not able to have access to the full marketplace of ideas, how can we possibly be well informed? Intellectual freedom supports democracy. Democracy relies on robust freedom of expression, independent media, and fact-based civic discourse to ensure accountability, expose corruption, and empower citizens. And we know from history that authoritarian regimes, suppress dissenting voices and views and often scapegoat members of traditionally marginalized groups. And that's why many of these books that are being challenged are about people of color, people who belong to the queer community, these marginalized groups are being demonized as, part of the march of authoritarianism. I will leave you, or end rather, with a quote from Helen Keller. Um, History has taught you nothing if you think you can kill ideas. Tyrants have tried to do that often before, and the ideas have risen up in their might and destroyed them. You can burn my books and the books of the best minds in Europe, but the ideas in them have seeped through a million channels and will continue to quicken other minds. This was a couple of weeks before the Nazi book burning that took place on May 10th in 1933. And that's what this image is from. As I've said, we've been here before. We've been here before. Hopefully, we can learn the lessons of history and remember them. So I'm going to conclude my formal discussion part and throw it to y'all if you have any questions. And thank you very much for attending. Well, you're very welcome. It is literally part of my job. So
I have a couple questions for you, Dr. Elkins.
sure.
So in 20, I'm sure you're already aware of it for some people who might not be. So in 2024, there was a lot coming out of Plano, Texas regarding the shutdown of their library and a very large lawsuit regarding it. With the trends that we're seeing with book banning for the last few years, do you think that this might be something that occurs throughout the country, or specifically the
I'm sorry, the uh, end of your question was kind of garbled with the audio. It's the Plano library you said and the lawsuit.
uh, so it's Lano. Let me see if I
Oh,
can type it.
Lano,
I'm so
sorry.
sorry for about the
It's
audio.
okay.
Um, so yes, there was a lawsuit in Lano, Texas in 2024.
Mm,
Um, that has kind of sparked a whole new wave of discussion when it comes to censorship, especially throughout Texas. Do
mhm.
you think that we might be seeing kind of a repeat in that, and specifically the states that have such a large record for book banning?
I don't know if it's a repeat so much as an ongoing. As I showed earlier with the one graph, boop, 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 oop, oh, there we go. Um, this had a massive surge that started in 2021. Um, and it seems to be an ongoing thing. Um, I mentioned earlier when I showed this graph that my understanding is that the numbers for the current year are less, so it's trending back downwards, but it's not as low as it used to be. So I think it's just part of what's been ongoing at this point. Um, I I'm curious to see what the new resting state will be, if that makes sense. You know, whether this is going to continue to trend downward or whether, you know, 3,000 is going to be the new, you know, level.
Fair enough. When people talk about banned books, they think mostly of the physical copies of books, like the books that we have on the shelves here at the library.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, what would censorship look like when it comes to electronic books or audiobooks that libraries provide outside of just classifications?
Well, fortunately, I don't know that because there are a few large library systems, like the New York Public Library, and then there's, I think it's Los Angeles, but it's a library in California. or library system, excuse me, in California, that they're like, yeah, you can sign up for a library card even though you don't live here, and here's all these books that are banned. Have at if you want, electronically. So, um, I mean, certainly, obviously, in a real response, not that what I said previously was flippant, but your local library could choose to end access to particular database, excuse me, databases or other services like Overdrive or whatever, or thereby limit your choices. It's a lot more complicated though because those models don't work on the same mechanism that print books work. Because usually, if you are buying access, it's like, here's the whole library. It's not really buying like an individual title electronically. So that creates its own complications, of course, because then you have parents who are complaining and they can't remove the book because it's part of the contract. And then sometimes what happens is the entire service gets removed, which, benefits nobody. But I, sorry, I was just remembering when I was a child and my mother told me not to cut my nose off to spite my face, and it took me a while to understand that. But eventually I did, and I see many noseless people these days, if you will follow the expression. But yeah.
So I guess my next question would be that you mentioned early on that I don't remember the exact words you used, but one of the most of the censoring in a way of I can't remember. Let me just rephrase the question I was going to ask. I'm so sorry.
It's
Um,
okay.
could funding be used as a sense of censorship? There's plenty of ways that public libraries specifically, I'm not, very familiar with school libraries, get
Hmm.
funding through different organizations, through the
Hmm.
government. And if
Hmm.
if if we were to pull back on that funding or take it away completely, we'd lose a lot of services like ebooks and audiobooks.
Hmm.
Would that be considered a form of censorship?
Um, I would imagine so. There's actually, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of the town. My class intellectual freedom lecture is in a couple weeks, so I haven't refreshed that part of it yet. But I know that there was a town in Michigan that voted to close their library entirely. Um, and I'm like, poof, a lot of noses, a lot of noses there, a lot of noses. But yes, no, that absolutely is a form of control that can be used to put pressure. That might be actually a good example of that soft censorship that I was talking about earlier.
So it was.
Um, okay, so as a way to control without doing the actual action, because when you file a complaint, a written complaint, that's then a public record. So, the skulkery of this like little soft censorship whispering kind of stuff. No, like that's you put it on paper like this. If you have a complaint, that's what the process is. That's we're going to follow the process. So, or hopefully we'll follow the process because as I was saying, Pan America is like it's 98%. It's 98% of these challenges are not actually being handled correctly. And I'm like, that's a lot. that's a lot, and really all it's going to take is a few people to get wind of that, and then they're going to start suing because the district is not following its own policies. Um, and that's going to take even more money away from the kids. And that's you know, I understand if you don't want your children to read about, I don't know, black people or queer people, that's certainly your right to choose for your children. At the same time, though, um, I think everybody could agree that we want good schools for our children. We want our children to have the resources that they need to learn, to get an education. And dragging these institutions into a culture war is not going to do anything except hurt the children. That's all that it's going to do, because it's taking money, time, and resources away that could be used on their education. So, it's, as I said, like, parents already have the right and the responsibility. Because another thing, we talk a lot about rights, but very rarely about responsibilities. They have the right and responsibility to direct their own children. That's up to them. So, and that's also where it should be contained. But anyway.
Very good. Okay, so I have one final question that I hope we leave on a high note, since we're right about on time, but I wanted to make sure that no one else had any further comments or questions.
And I will affirm the statement in the chat: strong policies, strong procedures, and then people willing to follow them. That's
Okay, so final question for the evening. And again, I want to thank you so much for being here and talking to us. What can everyday citizens that may not work in the library but might use the library pretty regularly do to fight back against the censorship or book banning?
Mhm. Well, the first thing that you're going to want to do is support your librarians. If you know that there's a challenge going on at your library, support the librarians. You can also be involved by being part of reconsideration committee. I was part of reconsideration committee a couple years ago. It was for the book Sold by Patricia McCormick, which is one of the most challenged books apparently. And I mean, it's not a I think it's a high school book. Um, and if you're unfamiliar with the story, it's basically a story of a young woman who gets trafficked. And there's or sorry, not a young woman, a girl, a teen, I think, girl, who gets trafficked. Um, and I mean, there's a very oblique reference to a sexual act occurring in one part of the book. It's pretty oblique. Like, you kind of have to like be paying real attention to understand the thing that you just read. Um, and I had offered to be part of this reconsideration committee, um, because that's a way that I could contribute as a citizen. Like, I'm not a parent, and while I did live in the school district at the time, that was a way I could participate. And I very distinctly remember one of the questions that I had to respond to was what's an alternative viewpoint? And I couldn't really figure out an alternative viewpoint on child sex trafficking. It's just bad. Um, so I, I, it was a quite inane question. I thought, because, and I really don't get the objection to that book because I was like, this is actually like giving you some like things to watch out for, so maybe you don't get trafficked yourself. Like, not that you're a Nepali girl living in the rural mountains or whatever, but still, like, some of these things are not okay and should be, ringing the little alarm bells in your head. So, I would say support your librarians. Consider, offering to serve on a reconsideration committee. Um, Donations are always welcome, financially, certainly. But you can also stay informed and go and support your librarians, at like the school board meetings or at the city council meetings or whatever the appropriate governing body meeting is. Um, there are things you can do. You are not helpless. So none of us are. So,
A few to that as well. Most of these have a contact page for your city council members. Use it. You can always, when preventing book bans and censorship can happen preemptively. Telling your city how great your library is, how often you use it is always helpful. Trusting in your librarians is good, and using your library specifically if you're wanting to make sure that this particular book or material does not get banned, circulating it, checking it out, keeps it on our shelves. Like you said, keeping informed, there's a really great resource called the Freedom to Read project that sends out newsletters pretty regularly if anyone is interested in that. Yeah, those are the ones that I know of.
I thought of one last thing, and this is kind of relevant to the amount of these challenges that are not following the actual process. Let your school board members, let your city council members know that you're paying attention. And if they aren't following their own processes, you're going to have a problem with that. That's an important thing as well. Because it's strong policy, strong procedures, but also strong people. And if you aren't exercising your First Amendment rights, so, all right.
All right, well, thank you again for joining us tonight, Dr. Elkins.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to have you. If anyone has any further questions, you're more welcome to email the library. That's librarian@crownlibrary.org. We're always happy to answer any questions you might have. Feel free if you'd like to revisit this event. We will have it posted on our YouTube channel, which is also from the library, and it should be posted in the morning.
Cool.
Well, I hope that everyone has a great night.
All right. You too. I will see you around.